Once again, we continue with Law You Should Know. From the Mineola Law Firm of Shane, Dox, Denise, Corker, and Sauer, here is attorney Kenneth J. Landau.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome back to Law You Should Know. We're talking about speaking for success for lawyers and business people and other professionals out there. And our guest is Marla Seiden. She's the president of Seiden Communications. As you've heard, she's a presentation skills trainer. She's also involved in public relations, and she helps people to perfect and also overcome their fear of giving a presentation. And Marla, I know you have a website where you have additional information about this topic, and just share it with us.
Yes, the website is Seiden, Seiden, communications.com, and I have some valuable tips that I think will be helpful for anyone who either wants to speak in public or, as I mentioned before, even networking or any other situation.
And, of course, if someone has a question or a problem they want to solve in terms of communications, they can always contact you through the website.
Yes, definitely. My email is on the website.
Now, we talked about telling stories, and the next step is how can someone prepare and also practice for a presentation?
Right. Well, that is extremely important. A lot of people tell me that they wing it, and that is probably the worst thing you can do. So you want to really, I recommend writing out your entire presentation. However, that's not what you're going to bring with you. Then you want to edit that down, and and then you want to have just key words as far as what you want to discuss. You should memorize your introduction, your conclusion, and any transition points going from one aspect to another. Another key aspect to practicing is to say it out loud, because the spoken word is very different from the written word. You can tape record yourself. You can say it to a spouse or a colleague or a friend. Just practice saying it out loud many, many times.
And you also want to make sure it's understandable, too. So you might want to practice it to the wall or to the mirror, but also a family member, your colleagues or staff, because you want to make sure it's understandable to them, someone who's not an expert.
Yes, I often practice in front of my husband. He's heard most of my presentations. And one thing I want to say is you should memorize your introduction, your conclusion, and transition points. The rest of it does not have to be memorized, but you should know those cold. And
any other suggestions on preparation? It's important to find out, you mentioned earlier, the level of sophistication of the audience from, try to get an idea of some areas and issues of concern to them as well, because you want to make it informative and interesting.
Right. You definitely want to know your audience. That is really key. And as I mentioned before, you can use a questionnaire, and sometimes the attendees will fill it out and sometimes they won't. Talk to the coordinator of the meeting or the conference and look at their website also.
And can you also ask for a show of hands at the beginning of a talk? How many people have a will? How many people have been injured? How many own a house? How many challenge their property taxes? Just to get a sense of the group and engage them a little bit.
Well, that is great to ask a question, but you really should know some of those things you mentioned you might not know. How many people have a will or that sort of thing. So just figure out a question that ties in with your topic and the message. But that gets them involved and engaged if they have to.
And you may see if there's a lot of people who who can use the information, or fewer, or maybe change it around slightly, make it on a different level, or depending on that response.
Right. Well, most of the time you have planned your presentation ahead of time. So if you can alter it, if you find that a lot of people might not be interested in what you plan to talk about, it's a little difficult off the cuff just to totally change it around.
It might be good to have an extra backup topic in case it goes faster, or in case you feel one of those topics talking points would not work.
Well, it's really better to plan it ahead, because I don't think it'll work out as well as if you change it in midstream.
Okay. And is there anything else the speaker should do before they actually give the presentation?
I think it's good if they visit the space where they're speaking, because it may be a large room, a large auditorium, or it could be a small conference room, and you really want to know what it looks like so that you can arrange the room according to your own needs.
And even if you're not able to go there in advance, you certainly want to get there early to make sure the setup is going to work for you, and the microphones and the layout, etc.
Right, and especially if you're using PowerPoint and technology, that you really need to make sure ahead of time. I would often call the place.
And how else can you try to be engaging with your voice and your body language?
Well, those two elements are critical. And your voice represents 37% of how your message is communicated, and body language is about 55%. So with voice, which I do a lot of training in, you want to have what we call vocal variety. So you want to change your tone, which is your emotion, your pitch, that avoids the monotone. Pausing and pacing is very important. Most people don't pause at all. They speak too quickly. And you also want to have the right volume and change it. Sometimes you speak a little louder, sometimes a little softer. In terms of body language, gestures are very important, but you don't want to overuse them. They should support what you're saying, and you don't want to have distracting gestures, which a lot of people do. They may just, out of nervousness, flap their arms type of thing. So
good gestures or positive gestures are good to help the talk come off better, but distracting gestures are not.
Exactly, right.
And is it okay to walk around a little bit?
Yes, you don't want to pace, but you want to walk when you change your thought process, the concept of what you're saying. So you might, let's say you have 3 points and you want to say, well, first we're going to talk about wills. And then when you get to the second point, second we're going to talk about advanced directives. So then you might move to another spot. And eye contact, we didn't mention that, but that's extremely important. And you want to look in different spots in the room. Try to look into somebody's eyes for 5 or 7 seconds. If you can't see them, just look in the direction that somebody would be sitting.
And you could position some friends around the room so to make that easier.
You can.
And what about the value? What else can a speaker do to maximize the value of the presentation?
Well, you can do different things before and after. In terms of pre-publicity, you can try to get your presentation into the calendars, whether it's Long Island Business News or Newsday. Put it on your website, social media. And at the presentation, again, we talked about before, making an offer. And after the presentation, you can do follow-up publicity.
Is it good to take some questions from the audience at the end of the presentation, if only to engage them as well?
Well, it's interesting that you said at the end of the presentation, because this is what I tell my students. You can definitely take questions, but not at the very end, because last words linger. So you don't want your last words to be the question. You want to have a better conclusion. So right before you end, I would say, before we conclude, I will take some questions. So they know there's a conclusion.
Should you do the questions after each point or wait till before you're going to give your conclusion?
Well, I think it really depends on the topic. I mean, there's no really right or wrong in terms of that. You want to take questions along those lines. So you can do it after a main topic. You can say, does anybody have any questions on this particular subject? Or you could take them all at the end.
And if there's no questions from the audience, is it okay to have one ready and just say a common question I get is about this and just go on to that, just to show that you care and you're knowledgeable?
Yes, I think that is a very good idea, because many times people are afraid to ask a question. They might have one. I find they'll come over at the end and they'll ask you privately.
And maybe that's a good thing to invite them, depending on the nature of the talk, to invite them up privately, with a question. So, you're building a connection with them.
Yes, I always say that if you have any questions after the
And what
talk.
about the use of visual aids or PowerPoint? Are those are good things, bad things?
Well, you've heard death by PowerPoint, and therefore you have to use it correctly. It can be a great tool to add interest and reinforce your message. If you have images, that's really the best way to use PowerPoint, and very few words on the slide, and a maximum of 6 lines on the slide.
It could be a key word or phrase you're talking about, or a picture that relates to what you're describing.
Right. The image is the most important, and you don't want to speak while the slide is up. You don't want to put up the slide and then talk over it, that kind of thing. So you don't want your talk to be a PowerPoint presentation, exactly.
You don't want to have the transcript up there of what you're reading.
Exactly, because then why are you up there?
We just have a moment or two left in the program today. Would you like to give any final tips?
Well, I'd like to tell people that they should follow what we call the 3 Ps, which we've talked about: prepare, practice, and have passion about what you're talking about. And be conversational, use vocal variety, avoid distracting gestures.
And if you've planned it right, these people are interested in what you have to say, so that that can be a way of relieving your anxiety. They want to hear you.
Yes.
And hear your message.
That's why you have to know that what you're saying really will appeal to the audience's needs and wants. And then just think to yourself, if you have a fear, that you're there to help them. And they really will appreciate what you're telling them.
And just give us your website again.
It's Seiden, Seiden, communications.com.
And what is the final tip for someone who is afraid of public speaking and how they can take the plunge? Overcome their fear. What's the best good way to do that in a few seconds?
They should learn the right techniques, and they should take the focus off of them and put it onto the audience, because they're there really to help them.
And practice it to themselves, then to one person, and gradually build, or even a stuffed animal or a dog.
Yes, I do that in my classes. I put up a row of stuffed animals, and people talk to them if I don't have anybody else there. So that's a great tip.
And if you can keep them interested, you're off to a good start.
That's right. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our guest, Marla Seiden, and she's the president of Seiden Communications in New Hyde Park. And as you've heard, she's a presentation skills trainer and also helps people to publicize the talk. And I think it's also good if people can give out their website when they're giving a presentation and have lots of useful information and a timeline and definitions on their website. So rather than giving too much detail, they can refer the audience to their website.
And they can send them follow-up information or give handouts, so they don't have to say it all.
Right, and just say the most important points. You're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC, and also over the internet at ncc.edu/WHPC. Podcasts of this and many other programs on WHPC are available by searching WHPC on iTunes. Please join us this same time next week for another program on Law You Should Know.